Did the Bible borrow its laws from ancient Babylon? Or are the laws of Moses fundamentally different from those of, say, the great King Hammurabi? In Exodus 21 through 22, we find some of the very first laws given to the children of Israel at Mount Sinai after the Ten Commandments. These laws were particularly centered around relational matters for what would become the theocratic nation of Israel later on, commonly referred to as mishpatim, judgments, or chukim, statutes. These laws are what would regulate justice, integrity, and honor throughout the society of ancient Israel. But did the Bible borrow these from ancient Babylon? Or are they different? What happens when we take a glance at them side by side, when we look at them and compare them and contrast them? What's up, everybody? I'm AJ from Ancient Bible World, and I'm excited to have you. Thanks for tuning in and joining. I'd like to get into the discussion of what can ancient laws teach us about a civilization, and just how closely or not do the laws of the Pentateuch compare to the laws of Hammurabi. So again, thanks for joining, and if you find this video interesting, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Now let's dive in. In the ancient world, law reveals what is prioritized in a nation. In other words, we can see what these societies valued morally and how they viewed themselves ideologically. In this segment, we'll look into select laws from two main sources. I mentioned them already, but just to be clear, they will be the Law Code of Hammurabi and the laws of the Pentateuch, or the Torah, specifically found in the book of Exodus. Now, just to give a background on our sources, the Pentateuch, or Torah, spans from Genesis through Deuteronomy and forms the theocratic law of the system of ancient Israel and is traditionally attributed to Moses. In traditional Jewish and Christian belief, this material is often dated to the late Bronze Age, around 1400 to 1200 BC, give or take. While modern biblical scholarship proposes various theories of composition and source development, those debates fell outside of the scope of this video. The Law Code of Hammurabi, on the other hand, is a collection of laws written in Old Babylonian Akkadian cuneiform and is preserved on what is known as the Diorite Stele. It is named after King Hammurabi the Great, the first major ruler of Old Babylonian Empire to unite much of Mesopotamia under Babylon. Just a note about Akkadian. Akkadian is written in what we call cuneiform script. These are syllabic signs. Usually, Akkadian and its signs represent one syllabic value, and they need to be transcribed and written, and after these values of syllables are transcribed and written, we can then put them together to discover what word is being conveyed by these signs. Although Hammurabi was renowned for his military conquests and political unification, it was his portrayal as receiving the law from the sun god Shamash that secured his lasting legacy, even leading to the king's later veneration. The stele was discovered by French archaeologist Joaquin Morgan in southwest Iran at the end of the 19th century. Having been carried off from Babylon as spoils of war by the Elamites, it stands out at 2.25 meters tall, roughly 7 feet 4 inches, and it dates to around 1755 to 1750 BCE, and it is now housed at the Louvre Museum in Paris. So what we'll be arguing today is, while the laws of Hammurabi and the covenant code of the Pentateuch share common ancient Near Eastern legal structure and even language, they differ fundamentally in their theological foundation and social ideology. I believe we can see, when we compare them closely, just how fundamentally different they are. There's an immediate example of this from the onset in what we refer to as the prologue, or the preamble, which is the opening of the laws that are being given. Notice something key here as I read both prologues or preambles to you. First, we have the prologue of the Exodus at Mount Sinai and the law giving. In Exodus chapter 20 verses 1 through 2, the Lord says, "And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage." We read this again in the second recording of the Decalogue in Deuteronomy chapter 5 verses 1 through 6. "And Moses summoned all Israel and said to them, Hear, O Israel, the statutes and the ordinances which I speak in your hearing this day, and you shall learn them and be careful to do them. The Lord our God made a covenant with us in Horeb. Not with our fathers did the Lord make this covenant, but with us, who are all of us here, alive this day. The Lord spoke with you face to face at the mountain, out of the midst of the fire, while I stood between the Lord and you at that time to declare to you the word of the Lord. For you were afraid because of the fire, and you did not go up into the mountain. He said, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Now we'll read the prologue of Hammurabi, and it's quite lengthy, so I'll just read lines 1 through 7. There was a time when the exalted Anu, the king of the Anunnaki, and Enlil, the Lord of heaven and earth, who determined the destinies of the nation, determined that Marduk, the first son born to Ea, should govern as Enlil all the peoples of the world. They exalted him among the Agigi, and gave Babylon its illustrious name, and made it preeminent throughout the earth, with its foundations as secure as heaven and earth. They established for him an everlasting reign with it. It was then that Anu and Enlil ordained Hammurabi, a devout prince who fears the gods, to demonstrate justice within the land, to destroy evil and wickedness, to stop the mighty exploiting the weak, to rise like Shamash over the mass of humanity, illuminating the land. They ordained me to improve the welfare of my people. I am Hammurabi, Enlil's chosen shepherd, who heaps up plenty and abundance, supplying the poor where earth and heaven meet, with whatever it needs, the devoted provider for Enlil. I am the powerful king who restored the site of Eridu, who purified worship in Ibzu, who marched in every corner of the world, who made the name Babylon famous, who made the heart of Marduk his lord happy, who attended Isagila at the proper time. I am a descendant of the royal line, one whom Sin created, who made Ur prosper, the humble and clever one who brought prosperity to Ikishnugal. I am a prudent king who listens obediently to Shamash, who powerfully fixes the foundations of Sipar.
Now Moses is the one to communicate the laws that God gives to Israel. However, he's not declaring, God has chosen me. I am the one who the laws come through. I am the one who is establishing these laws to you. It's a mediation. The dialogue is solely, primarily focused on the covenantal relational aspect between the God of Israel and the people of Israel. Now look at Hammurabi. Who's the focus there? Hammurabi, of course, he's the one that he proclaims again and again and again, the one the gods chose, the great prince of Shamash. He declares his royal line, he declares his specialness, he declares his authority as the one whom the gods chose to enact justice throughout all the earth. And so it's a very different ideological focus here. One law in the Pentateuch focuses on relational, covenantal, theological dynamic. The other law in the Code of Hammurabi is primarily imperial. The law for the king, it's actually what enforces his rule. It's what legitimizes his rule and his empire. So in this way, King Hammurabi declares his authoritative imperial position through the making of his laws, because he is the powerful king that was chosen by the gods.
We'll be taking a look at 3 examples of various case laws. What is case law? Well, case law is a body of law based on a decision that judges have made in past cases. It is synonymous with judicial precedent and common law, representing the legal principles established through court rulings rather than legislative statutes or regulations. It provides detailed, fact-specific interpretations of laws, unlike the abstract general language of statutes. In other words, if X happens, then Y follows. It's situational. If this happens, then that follows. The case laws we'll be discussing will be case laws of assault, protection of the unborn, treatment of criminals, specifically regarding burglary. So let's look at matters of assault in the Code of Hammurabi, lines 196 through 205. The first thing I'll note is there's a distinction to be made within the language that is used as identifiers of who the law is referring to: the perpetrator, the victim, have different terminology used within the law code of Hammurabi, and depending on which term is used, the laws will vary. Different terms are used for different categories of people, different classes of people. Let me show you what I mean. In Akkadian, the word awilum means man or human, but in our context, specifically, it means a free man, and it's also used alongside the construct phrase mar awilim, which means the son of a free man, or marat awilim, the daughter of a free man. And this is significant because this word carries specific connotations with referring to class. A free man is a full citizen and has full rights within the ancient society. This is significant, and we'll see why in a moment. The next identifying word is mushkinum, and this word can mean dependent, bondsman of the palace, or simply poor man. The next describing word we have is waradum, and it means slave, servant. It's used within the construct phrase warad awilim, which means the slave of a man. You may be asking, why discuss this? What's the importance? Well, let's read the laws, and we'll see. Laws 196 through 205 in the Hammurabi Code regarding assault. If a man, awilum, has blinded the eye of another man, inmar awilim, literally the eye of the son of a man, or the eye of the son of a free man, his eye will be blinded. Did you catch that? If a man, or free man, has blinded the eye of another son of a free man, his eye will be blinded. Seems pretty fair, right? Let's keep going. Line 197. If he has broken a man's awilim bone, his bone will be broken. So far, so good. Nothing out of the ordinary. 198. If he has blinded a working man's eye, or has broken a working man's bone, he will weigh out 1 mana of silver. A working man is from this word mushkenum, poor man, dependent person, basically just a lower person when it comes to societal class. So we see here already a distinction being made that a free citizen, a higher status of class, gets less punishment if he harms a working class man or a poorer, lowlier member of society. Things are starting to get interesting now, aren't they? Let's keep going. If he has blinded the eye of a man's slave, wada dawilim, or has broken the bone of a man's slave, he will weigh out half his value. So again, if he, talking about the same man, same subject, a citizen, a free citizen, blinds the eye of another man's slave, wada dawilim, the slave of a man, he has to pay half his value in weight. So when we look at this law closely, who's really the victim here? Is it the slave, or is it the owner? It's the owner. The man who harmed the slave, or the man who blinded the slave, has to pay the owner half the slave's value. This is because if you hurt a man's slave, you're taking money away from him. You're slowing down his work. You're lowering the value of his slave, which is his property. So you owe him money, according to King Hammurabi. Let's keep going. If a man, a wilum, so a free citizen, has knocked out the tooth of a man, a wilim, of his own rank, his tooth will be knocked out. So we see here again 2 citizens on equal levels of society getting equal and fair punishment when they commit a crime. However, if we keep going, if he has knocked out the tooth of a mushkinum, poor man, working man, he will pay out 1/3 mina of silver. So again, we have distinctions being made for awilum class people from mushkinum, working members of society, lower class members of society, poor members of society. If you hurt one of these types of people in society, you yourself don't have to be hurt, but you just have to pay something. If a man, awilum, has struck the cheek of a man who is of higher rank than him, and the Akkadian phrase here is lit awilum sha ilishu rabu, literally the cheek of a man who is over him in greatness, or above him in greatness, he will be struck with an ox whip 60 times in the assembly. So even an awilum class member of society can get into more trouble than usual if they strike an awilum member of society who is of higher status than them. This could be talking about a city official, perhaps a political figure, a legislator of some kind. If you commit a crime against them in Old Babylonian society, according to Hammurabi, your punishment will be pretty severe. So for the most part, as we've read, The Elam class shares some nice privileges when it comes to laws, punishments, and they're pretty well protected. That is until they harm someone who's above them in society. This is what we call a caste structure of society, where we see clear guidelines, boundaries, borders within the ranking system of society. The rich and powerful are the elite of society, and their laws are different than those of the lower, less important, less rich people, the lowly people of society. It seems like two different standards. Let's move on to Law 203. If one man, and the phrase used here is Marawilim, the son of a man, so essentially the same thing as in a Wilim, the son of a free man is equal to that of a free man, has struck the cheek of another such man, Mar Awilim, of similar status, he shall pay 1 man of silver. So again, we see a different standard for the Wilim class people than we have of the Mushkinum class people. Number 204. If a working man, Mushkinum, has struck the cheek of a working man, Mushkinum, he will pay out 10 shekels of silver. And finally, Law 205. If a man's slave, Wara Wilim, has struck the cheek or side of a man, Mar Awilim, the son of a free man, his ear will be cut off. Pretty severe, right? So we see, just by reading these 11 laws that have to do with cases of assault, there are certainly different standards within the law code of Hammurabi for different classes of members of society. Now that we've looked at the laws of assault in Hammurabi, let's shift gears to talk about matters of assault in the Pentateuch. And we'll go to Exodus 21, verses 12 through 14, and also verses 18 through 21. Now, similarly to how I did in the Code of Hammurabi, let's look at the language used regarding these laws and the category of citizens within these laws. In Hebrew, the word for man is ish, and we certainly have that term here within these laws that I'm getting ready to read you. The plural of this form, ish, is anashim, meaning simply men. The term for servant, or slave, is aved, and we have all three of these present here within these laws that I'm getting ready to read you. What we don't have, however, are the nouns that typically are used in biblical Hebrew to describe the poor, such as the word ani, which means poor or afflicted, dal, which means weak or literally thin. These are just two words of a few that are used to describe the poor or the lowly or the lower class within society, and we won't find them in Exodus 21 through 22, which should stand out to us already. But let us continue. As we read Exodus 21 verses 12 through 14, whoever strikes a man so that he dies shall be put to death. In the Hebrew, what's interesting here is the first man is simply not written, but he's implied by the active participle makeh. It implies that this striking action refers to any person. So this is why translators will translate it usually as whoever, even though there's only one instance of the word ish here, which is after the verb and implies that this is the man being struck. We have the word death, mot, repeated, and some translations will translate this as an emphasis, he shall surely die, which is not wrong to say in biblical Hebrew. When you have a word repeated, it can certainly mean emphasis. And one thing that's interesting to note is we just have the word ish, man who strikes a man and he dies will be put to death. So far, it's similarly to that of the Hammurabi code. Ish would be equivalent to a wilum. So in Hammurabi, if an awilum strikes a man, then he will be struck. Pretty equal, right? Let's keep reading. Verse 13. But if he did not lie in wait for him, but God let him fall into his hand, then he will appoint for you a place which he may flee. Here we have the Pentateuch already distinguishing itself for accidental death, in that God allowing this victim to fall into the hands of the striker was not at the fault of the striker. It was not an intentional killing. It was not an intentional murder. And this is what we read about in the verses of the Bible where it talks about, you shall set up cities throughout your territories for the manslayer, the accidental killer, to flee, and he shall remain there for a time until the death of the high priest, and then he will be allowed to return safely to his home, and the avenger of blood will not be allowed to avenge him. Verse 14. But if a man willfully attacks another to kill him treacherously, you shall take him from my altar, that he may die. when men quarrel, and one strikes the other with a stone, or with his fist, and the man does not die, but keeps his bed, then if the man rises again and walks abroad with his staff, he that struck him shall be clear. Only he shall pay for the loss of his time, and shall have him thoroughly healed. Are you catching the distinction? If two men quarrel with one another, and one is seriously injured, the one who did the injuring has to pay for the man's time, because time is money, even in the ancient world, just as it is today. So he will pay for his time, and he will also pay and ensure that this man is healed. So already we see an emphasis around the victim, an emphasis around humanhood, an emphasis around people rather than status or property. When a man strikes his slave, male or female, with the rod, and that slave dies under his hand, he shall be punished. In Hebrew we have the word aved in the form of avdo, with the masculine singular possessive suffix at the end, his slave. And we also have amato, female slave or female servant, also with the third masculine singular possessive suffix at the end, amato. But notice here that if a man strikes his slave or his servant so that they die, male or female, then he shall be punished. I can assure you, we have nothing like that in the Code of Hammurabi. In verses 26 to 27 it says, when a man strikes the eye of his slave, avdo, male or female, avdo or amato, and destroys it, he shall let that slave go for the eye's sake. Verse 27, if he knocks out the tooth of his slave, male or female, avdo or amato, he shall let the slave go free for the tooth's sake. I can assure you we have nothing like this in the Code of Hammurabi. In fact, we have quite the opposite. Runaway slaves are to be executed, and even those who harbor runaway slaves are to be executed. So quite the contrast we have. The Hebrew Bible already placing emphasis on humanity, protection of people, and even protection of some of the lowest members of society. Slaves, male and female. We just read that if a man injures his own slave, harming his eye, his or her eye, or his or her tooth, that slave is to be set free for that injury. Now, slavery is a fascinating topic within the Hebrew Bible and within the ancient world in and of itself. In Hammurabi, we certainly have laws that govern regulations of slavery, but we don't really have the distinction between native slaves and foreign slaves, and a separation with the laws thereof. In the Hebrew Bible, however, it differs. We have separation between Hebrew slaves and foreign slaves that would have been acquired in war. And this topic, while as fascinating as it is definitely worthy of its own study and video. So let's move on for now. Protection of the unborn. Back to Hammurabi. Now I'll read you laws 209 to 214. If a man, a wilum, struck a man's daughter, marat a wilum, both talking about free citizens here, and has caused her to have a miscarriage, he will weigh out 10 shekels of silver for her fetus. If that woman has died, his daughter will be executed. In what seems to be a harsh, vengeful, retaliatory type of law. If you kill a man's daughter, your daughter will be killed. If he has caused the daughter of a commoner, marat mushkinim. So again, marat mushkinim, the daughter of a poor person, the daughter of a working class person, the daughter of a lowly person, to have a miscarriage through striking her, he will weigh out 5 shekels of silver, showing this distinction already between classes, even in the harming of the unborn. If that woman has died, he shall pay half of a manna of silver. So the penalty is quite different for an Awilim class member of society to harm another Awilim class member's unborn child or the daughter of another Awilim class member of society than that from a Mushkinim member of society. If he has struck a man's slave girl, Amat Awilim, notice Amat Awilim, the same word in Hebrew for female slave, and made her lose her unborn child, he shall pay 2 shekels of silver. Lastly, 214, if that slave girl has died, he shall pay 1/3 of a manna of silver. So we see here not very much protection for the lowly of society in the law code of Hammurabi, not very much protection for slaves, not very much protection for the children of slaves, highlighting for us the foundational ideology and the worldview of Hammurabi and the Ancient Babylonians. In this system, power is what mattered. Imperialism, social status, class. These are the things that determined your value and your worth within society. Let's go to Exodus now. Exodus chapter 21, verses 22 through 25. When men strive together and hurt a woman with child, so that there is a miscarriage, and yet no harm follows, the one who hurt shall be fined, according to the woman's husband shall lay upon him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. If harm follows, then you shall give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. Now you'll notice here there's no distinction in language. There's no distinguishing between class, there's no distinguishing between persons. It's simply if two men are fighting and they hurt a woman. That's it. And law says if they cause the woman to birth early, but there's no injury, then the perpetrator will pay a fine. However, if there's any injury whatsoever, then each injury will be repaid in equal punishment to the perpetrator, even up to life. So again, we have here a fundamental difference in ideological perception, in moral value, and the value of life between the laws of ancient Israel that were given by the God of Israel through Moses as a mediator versus the laws of King Hammurabi that were given by the great King Hammurabi because he was chosen by Shamash. The last section we'll cover is treatment of criminals, specifically within burglary. And in the Law Code of Hammurabi, laws 21 through 24, it says, if a man broke into a house, he will be executed and hung in front of that breach. Whoa, wait a minute. So, right where the thief breaks in, kill him there, hang him there for all the world to see. Let it be an example. In the old Babylonian Empire, theft will get you killed. It will get you hung, and you will be left there for all passerbyers to see your body hanging because you broke into someone's house. If a man committed a robbery and has been caught, that man will be executed. So, if you commit a robbery and are not caught in the act, but are caught later, you are still executed. Line 23. If a robber has not been caught, the robbed man will establish his missing property before the god and the town and mayor in whose region and district the robbery was committed, will replace his missing property for him. Line 24. If a life was lost, the town and mayor will give away out 1 mina of silver to his people. So here, if the robber's never caught, then it is the responsibility of the mayor and the townsmen to reimburse this man, this victim who suffered from a burglary. And if someone was killed in his house, then the justice that they offer is simply monetary compensation. Let's look at Exodus to see what Exodus says about this situation. Exodus 22 verses 1 through 3. If a man steals an ox or a sheep and kills it or sells it, he shall pay 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. He shall make restitution. If he has nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. If the thief is found breaking in and he is struck so that he dies, there shall be no blood guilt for him. But if the sun has risen upon him, there shall be blood guilt for him. Now you notice the distinction here? When the thief is caught, he is immediately charged with paying restitution. This is to compensate for the harm that the thief has caused the victim of stealing an animal from his home, which would have been quite detrimental in the ancient world. And if he cannot reimburse this amount, then he will be indebted to the victim as a servant until his debt is paid off. As we can see already, a context of how sometimes slavery would happen. But notice how the thief is demanded to pay restitution or even subjected to servitude to the owner if he cannot pay his restitution. But he's not executed, a contrast from Code of Hammurabi yet again. Now what's interesting here is in verse 2 it says, if the thief is caught breaking in and he is struck so that he dies, there shall be no blood guilt for him. So here, if we have the burglar breaking and entering, and he is caught in the act, and essentially the landowner feels threatened enough to strike this burglar, there is no blood guilt for him. No one has to pay anything. The owner is not guilty of murder, and obviously the thief does not have to pay anything because, well, he's dead. But if the sun has risen upon him, there shall be blood guilt for him. Now, this can be interpreted one of 2 ways, and commentators opt for both depending on who you talk to. Some say that this is referring to the owner of the house, and the previous verse is only regarding the situation that occurred in the nighttime, which would explain why he struck and killed the slave. If he didn't know if the slave was a real threat in the nighttime, it would be pretty scary to determine whether or not you and your family were safe, which would explain the implication of nighttime in verse 3 that says, "But if the sun has risen on him." So again, this is one interpretation. One problem with this interpretation, though, is that it doesn't specifically mention the word night. It doesn't mention the word Erev, the word Laila in verse 2 at all. So as much as this situation makes sense, the verses are slightly ambiguous here. Others opt for the blood guilt referring to the criminal. Simply stating, "There shall be blood guilt for him," implies that if the sun has risen upon him and he was not caught and was captured, and now he has to pay his restitution that is implied in verse 1. So which interpretation do you think makes more sense? Either way, what is interesting is nuance that is given to the ancient Israelites here to show preservation of life, protection of all humans involved. There isn't just a one standalone law that says kill and execute anyone who's guilty of burglary. Whether you catch them in the act or you catch them later, kill them. That's not what we have going on here. So, have we answered the question, did the Bible borrow its laws from ancient Babylon, or are the laws of Moses fundamentally different from the laws of Hammurabi? I think you can say with confidence that we've established our thesis from the very beginning. While the laws of Hammurabi and the covenantal code certainly share common ancient Near Eastern legal structure and even some language, they differ in their theological foundation and even in their social ideology. The Code of Hammurabi is primarily focused on power structure, hierarchy, a caste system. The laws are given from top down. Hammurabi says it again and again as the great shepherd of Enlil, how he was the chosen loyal noble prince of the gods Shamash and Marduk and Ea, and that it was through him that justice would rule throughout the land. So this law that he prescribes confirms and legitimizes his reign. A very fundamentally different thing than the language of the laws, than the structure of the laws of the Pentateuch. Specifically with the laws that we covered here in Exodus, where as we said earlier, the dynamic is covenantal and relational. The God of Israel desired to enter into a covenant with the people of Israel. He used a mediator who was Moses. However, the laws would apply to everyone. All classes of people, all citizens were viewed equally in the eyes of the God of Israel, and they all had to pay the same consequences if they broke the same laws. I don't know about you guys, but I think anytime we have laws of a nation that value the equality and the equity of all people, then I think that is a recipe for success. That is a strategy that will lead to a thriving nation and a thriving team. Kind of like the strategy of the Dodgers in the World Series. Well, that's it. I hope you've enjoyed this video. And again, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you found this video interesting and informative in any way. Until next time, everybody, this is AJ with Ancient Bible World. Take care.